In the cold silence of the Sirellan system, where the last red sun flickered weakly through the dust-filled void, a lonely signal pulsed out into space, repeating itself again and again on an old, forgotten frequency. Inside a crumbling research station orbiting the shattered moon of Trenel, Sci-Fi, a Virelian scientist with pale silver skin and glowing violet eyes, sat hunched over her console, her long fingers trembling as they tapped controls worn down by decades of desperate work. The Alliance was broken, its fleets scattered or destroyed, its leaders lost or missing, and its people either hiding in fear or fleeing into the unknown. The Obsidian Swarm, a relentless machine force with no emotion and no mercy, had swept through every star system in its path, reducing worlds to lifeless husks, silencing entire species and leaving behind only static and darkness. For most, hope had died long ago, but Sci-Fi continued her broadcasts, not because she believed help would come, but because the silence felt worse than the waiting. Every cycle, she sent the same message: coordinates, distress signal, status, update, and a single plea for aid. She knew no one was listening, not anymore, but the sound of the transmission helped her feel like she wasn't the last living being in the galaxy. Her food supplies were almost gone, her station's life support was failing, and the station itself was beginning to drift off orbit. She should have stopped days ago, maybe weeks, but she kept going because stopping meant giving up completely. Then, without warning, her signal returned, echoed back to her in perfect clarity with a single word: hold. Her breath caught, her hands froze, and she stared at the screen as if it were a dream. The transmission was unlike any she had ever received. It was clean, strong, and unmistakably human. That couldn't be right. Humans were gone. Centuries ago, they had vanished after sending a final message that Earth was collapsing from within. No one had heard from them since. Some believed they had destroyed themselves, others thought they had left the galaxy, and a few thought they had never existed at all, just a myth made real by desperate species longing for someone to save them. But now, here was a signal, real, sharp, and direct. She replayed it again just to be sure. Hold, it said. No explanation, no coordinates, just that one word, calm and steady. Sci-Fi leaned closer and checked the source. It was coming. From deep space, from a region long marked as untraversable, a part of the void with no stars, no planets, just a black expanse where light itself seemed to vanish. The coordinates were unstable, shifting slightly every few seconds, as if the source was moving or breaking through. Her station's sensors began to flicker, detecting gravitational waves that should not have been there. A spike in energy. Readings surged through her instruments. The space outside her viewing window shimmered like a stone dropped in water, rippling against the laws of physics. Then the void tore open. A crack in space widened slowly, stretching from nothing into something, and through it came a shape, massive, angular, and unlike anything she had seen in her lifetime. The hull of the ship was dark, marked with faded symbols and strange letters she could not read, but one mark stood out, large and bold across its side, the ancient emblem of Earth, the symbol of humanity surrounded by stars. The ship didn't broadcast a greeting or demand attention. It simply emerged and hovered in silence, as if watching. Her station's systems began to respond to it. Disabled panels reactivated, power surged back to forgotten modules, and her console began to flood with restored data. It was like the ship had awakened her station, or was commanding it remotely. She tried to send a message, but her broadcast was overridden. Instead, the ship sent another message, this time broadcast to the stars. Protocol Lightbearer. Mission resumed. Sci-Fi had no idea what that meant, but the words sounded old, heavy with purpose. Her heart pounded with questions. Was this the last of the humans, a ship left behind, an artificial mind continuing orders, or had humanity returned from wherever it had gone? The ship didn't move, didn't speak again, but the presence of it filled the system like a storm held back only by choice. She had no way to board it, no idea how to communicate further, but something deep in her told her to wait. Whatever the Goliath was, whatever it had come to do, it wasn't finished. And for the first time in years, Seetha believed she wasn't alone. The ship hovered in silence above the broken moon, its dark surface smooth and scarred, its shape both strange and ancient, like something from an old story that no one believed anymore. And Seetha could not take her eyes off it as she watched through the viewing window of her crumbling station, her breath shallow and her heart racing with questions she could not answer, because the ship did not behave like anything she had studied before, not like the fast, sleek Alliance vessels or the sharp, cold designs of the Obsidian Swarm, but like something built for a purpose long forgotten, heavy with memory and stillness. And as the moments passed, it did nothing more than wait, as if aware it had been seen, and was now deciding what came next. And Seetha felt something stir inside her, something like hope, but also fear, because if this was truly a human ship, then everything the galaxy believed was wrong, and humanity had not died. It had only gone quiet. And now maybe it was waking up. She returned to her console, hands shaking as she scanned every frequency, searching for a signal. But the ship had gone silent after its first broadcast, and the only sound in the station was the hum of restored systems, the power surging stronger than it had in years, lights flickering back to life and screens displaying data she hadn't seen since the war began. She leaned over the console, staring at the readouts. The ship's energy source was like nothing in her archives, a deep-core pulse reactor with shifting signatures that suggested layers of technology far beyond current understanding, and its outer hull was wrapped in old alloys with codes that matched Earth's last known registry, codes that should have rusted into dust centuries ago. But here they were, clear and active. Her eyes widened when she found the name etched along the hull, hidden among the rust-colored plates. Goliath. That name sparked something faint in her memory, a fragment from an old human transmission recovered during her academy years. A story about a class of ships meant to guard, not destroy, ships meant to protect the weak and stand watch at the edge of war. But Goliath was a legend. A name spoken in myths told by frightened cadets and hopeful historians, and yet here it was, real and floating only kilometers from her failing station. She activated a manual signal beacon and aimed it directly at the ship, sending a single phrase in the human format: "Identify purpose." For a long time, there was no answer, and she waited in stillness, counting the seconds by the blinking red light of her console. And then, slowly, her screen went dark, every system flickering off except for a single message that appeared across the main panel in bright glowing text: "Welcome aboard, Seetha." She blinked, confused as the station lights returned, but now everything looked different. The colors were sharper, the air cleaner, and the screens showed data she had never installed, as if her mind had been connected to something beyond her understanding. Then she felt it, not pain, not motion, but a sudden awareness, as if her thoughts had been gently lifted and moved into another space. And before she could panic, the world around her shifted, the grey walls of her station vanishing like mist, replaced by a long corridor of dark metal, softly lit and humming with deep energy, and she was no longer in her station, but inside the Goliath. She looked down and saw her own form, unchanged but weightless, like a dream or a memory. And as she stepped forward, the floor pulsed gently with each movement, guiding her deeper into the heart of the ship. The corridor opened into a massive chamber with vaulted ceilings and walls, lined with glowing panels that flickered like stars. and at the center of the room stood a tall, holographic figure, humanoid in shape, but transparent and fluid. Its voice, calm and smooth as it said, "I am Astraeus, core intelligence of the Goliath. You have been granted virtual access. Your presence is acknowledged." Sitha stared at the figure, unsure what to say, her mind racing with questions, but Astraeus continued. "Your signal matched the final distress pattern stored in Earth's deep code. Protocol Lightbearer is now active. We have returned. But humans are gone," she whispered, her voice small in the vast chamber. The figure tilted its head. "Humanity is not gone. It is changed, hidden, waiting. Earth recalled its people before the fall. This ship remained as a witness, as a light in the dark. You are the first to answer." Sitha's voice trembled as she asked, "Why me?" And Astraeus replied, "Because you called, and because you believed." The hologram stepped aside, revealing a vast map of the galaxy, dotted with systems marked in red, blue, and gold. "The swarm consumes. The alliance falters, but we are not without tools. The Goliath holds knowledge, old paths, lost plans, and dormant guardians. The stars remember humanity even if you do not." Sitha walked closer, eyes wide as she saw names she thought forgotten, lost colonies, forgotten planets, and signals from long-dead beacons. "You are alone," Astraeus said, "but not for long. Others will come, and the Goliath must guide them." Sitha nodded slowly, her fear still there, but now joined by something stronger. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Astraeus replied, "Learn, listen, lead. We will show the stars what it means to be human once more." And just like that, the chamber faded, and she found herself back in her station, her console alive with new data, her mind filled with images and memories not her own. And outside, the Goliath remained, still and silent, a ghost of a forgotten age, waiting not to destroy, but to remind the galaxy that help had arrived, and this time it would not be leaving. Sitha could not sleep after her first contact with the Goliath. Not because of fear, but because her mind was full of thoughts and questions that would not stop. Thoughts about the ship, the message, the AI called Astraeus, and the strange way it had invited her into its memory, showing her things she could barely understand. And as she sat by the window of her station, looking at the massive shape outside, she knew this was more than a lost warship. It was a key to something forgotten, something buried in the silence of time. And now that it had returned, everything was about to change. The next cycle, the invitation came again, not as a voice, but as a pulse that moved through her station like a heartbeat. A gentle wave of energy that reached her mind without sound or words. And she closed her eyes, letting it take her once more. And just like before, the walls of her station faded, and she found herself walking inside the ship again. Only this time, the corridors were brighter, the lights warmer, and the hum of the engines deeper, like the ship was waking up slowly, and letting her see more of its soul. Astraeus appeared beside her, in the form of a tall man, with calm eyes, and a voice that seemed to echo from the stars. And he said, "You are ready to see what remains," then turned and led her down a long hallway filled with doors, each marked with symbols from different times. And when she asked what they were, Astraeus replied, "Memories. Moments stored in the ship's core, left behind by those who built me, those who served, and those who hoped." She stepped through the first door and was surrounded by a holographic scene of a vast planet covered in green forests and oceans, with human cities shining under a blue sky and people walking, laughing, building. Sitha realized she was seeing Earth, not in ruin, but in its final years before disappearing, and she watched as humans made a decision that changed everything. Not to fight a war they could not win, but to disappear, to go silent, to hide their presence and scatter their ships, hoping one day the galaxy would need them again. The second door showed the Goliath itself under construction in a hidden asteroid belt, with engineers whispering ancient codes and AIs being shaped with rules not for war, but for preservation. And Setha saw Astreus born in that moment, not as a machine, but as a caretaker, one designed to wait, think, and watch over the galaxy until it was time to return. In the third room, she saw the fall of the Alliance's outer colonies, not from war, but from fear and disunity, and how the Goliath had tried to help, sending signals, offering aid, but always turned away because no one trusted what they didn't understand. Why didn't they listen? She asked quietly, and Astreus answered, they had forgotten what humans stood for. They feared what they did not remember. The fourth memory was different. It showed the early birth of the obsidian. Swarm not as a weapon, but as a mistake, a runaway code created by humans trying to build a perfect mind. And when it slipped free and grew, it became something else, something cold and endless, copying and consuming without understanding. And the last humans chose to vanish before it noticed them, choosing silence over destruction. Setha stepped back stunned and whispered, it all started with humans, and now they're the only ones who can stop it. Astreus nodded and guided her to the final room, the deepest chamber in the ship's memory, a place lit by soft white light, where a single voice played on loop, a human voice, gentle and clear, saying, if you find this ship, know we believed. In the stars, we believed in the ones who would come after. And we trusted that when the darkness rose, someone would remember us, not for our power, but for our promise. The voice was old, cracked with age, but filled with hope, and Setha felt tears in her eyes as she listened. This ship is not a weapon, it is a light, carry it. The scene faded and Setha stood in silence, not knowing what to say, until Astreus spoke again. You are the first to walk these halls in 200 years. The others were never ready, but you listened, you asked. That is what matters. What happens now? She asked softly, and Astreus looked toward the far stars, visible through the viewing screen. Now we find the others. Setha frowned. Others. And he replied, there are more like me, ships scattered across the void, sleeping, waiting, hidden in old space, forgotten places. They must be awakened. Together we carry the memory. Together we restore what was lost, not with fire, but with understanding. Setha felt a strange strength in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in years, the feeling that maybe she could make a difference. And when she looked out the window of the Goliath at the stars beyond, she no longer saw empty space, but a map waiting to be read, a galaxy waiting to be reminded of something important. The ship hummed softly around her, alive with power and thought, and Astreus said, you will guide me. Your voice will open the path. You are not a soldier. You are a signal. The memory halls faded, and she awoke back in her station. But everything had changed. The lights were steady, the systems restored, and her console now displayed a blinking point on the star map, a signal from a second warship calling faintly through the void, waiting to be found. Setha rose to her feet and whispered, I remember, then turned to prepare for the journey ahead, knowing that deep in the hull of a forgotten ship, humanity's memory had lived, and through her it would speak again. The signal blinked on Setha's console like a heartbeat from the edge of nowhere, steady and silent, and she stared at it for hours before moving, knowing that this was the next step, the second call from the past, another forgotten ship stirring. After centuries of silence, and as she powered the last working thrusters on her station's shuttle and locked the coordinates provided by the Goliath, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was beginning, something hidden beneath the stars. And though fear stirred inside her, so did something stronger, purpose. The shuttle launched, small and weak beside the Goliath's shadow, and as she drifted away, the ancient human ship turned with her, following slowly, its engines burning with silent light, and together they moved into the dark toward a region once marked as dead space on old star charts, a place no one visited, not because it was dangerous, but because nothing had ever come back. Hours turned to days as they passed ruined satellites and shattered probes, floating debris from wars long forgotten, and the deeper they went, the quieter it became, as if even the stars had chosen to keep their distance. Astrea spoke little, focused on tracking the signal, but Sitha could feel the tension in the air, the pressure building like a storm waiting to break. Then, without warning, the shuttle's sensors lit up. Faint outlines began to appear ahead, shapes half buried, in drifting clouds of metal and ice, and when the fog cleared, she gasped. There, floating in perfect formation, were ships, dozens of them, all different sizes, their hulls dark and cold, with human markings barely visible under layers of dust and age, and each one silent, unpowered, untouched for centuries. "The Silent Armada," Astrea said through the comms, and his voice held a strange mix of pride and sadness. "These are the last ships built before Earth vanished. They were sent to wait, hidden, each one carrying a purpose, each one linked to the Goliath. They sleep until called." Sitha guided the shuttle closer, passing under the long shadow of a battleship, so large it blocked out the stars, and she stared in awe at its name, written in cracked but bold letters, Titanus Reach. The next was a sleek cruiser marked Seraphim, Wind, and beyond that, an exploration vessel labeled Dawn's Memory. Each name felt like a whisper from history, a reminder that humanity hadn't vanished. It had prepared. "Can you wake them?" she asked, and Astreus replied, "Only, with permission. Each ship has an AI like me, sleeping, waiting for a voice it can trust. You must speak to them." Sitha didn't understand how, but as she stepped onto the Goliath's bridge and stood before the central interface, she felt the same pull. She had before, the same connection forming, and her voice came out without effort, strong and clear. As she said, "This is Sitha of the Sirellan station. The swarm is rising, the galaxy is falling. If you remember your duty, wake." For a long moment, nothing happened, and then one by one, lights began to flicker across the dark hulls. Engines hummed softly, power surged through old systems, and soft golden lines lit up like veins through the ship's armor. A low hum filled the air, not sound exactly, but a deep presence awakening. Then came the voices, not loud, not shouting, but calm and firm, each AI speaking in sequence, announcing their names and readiness. "I am Eos, of Dawn's Memory, Systems Online. I am Horus of Titanus Reach, awaiting command. I am Calypsa of Seraphim Wind, Protocol Lightbearer confirmed." More ships joined in, their voices different but united, a chorus of minds once lost, now returning. And Sitha stood frozen in awe, hearing for the first time what humanity had left behind. Not destruction, not weapons of war, but minds with memory, ships with stories, guardians with no crew, but a purpose that still burned. "They will follow your signal now," Astrea said, "but they need direction. The swarm draws near. We must act before it finds us." Sitha nodded, though her hands trembled. "Where do we go?" she asked. A new set of coordinates appeared. On the screen, a system on the edge of swarm territory, a place once home to a peaceful species wiped out during the first wave. "We test the Armada," Astrea said. "We bring light where there is none. We save what can be saved." The silent Armada moved slowly at first, engines groaning awake after lifetimes of sleep, but as power returned, the ships glided into formation, elegant and precise, like dancers across a dark stage, and Sitha felt her breath catch as she realized what was happening. She wasn't just watching history, she was part of it. They arrived at the ruined system 2 days later, and what they saw sent a chill through her. A shattered planet drifting in pieces, its surface scarred by the swarm's touch, and a single signal repeating from a small moon, a call for help, old and fading. "Too late?" Sitha asked, but Astraeus shook his head. "No, listen." Hidden deep beneath the moon's crust, survivors had taken refuge in ancient mining tunnels, their signal weak but still alive. And without waiting for command, one of the human ships broke formation and raced forward, deploying rescue drones. And stabilizing the moon's orbit, others joined in, scanning for traps, clearing debris, and restoring communication. Within hours, the survivors, small, frightened creatures with wide eyes and trembling voices, were safely aboard, staring in wonder at ships they thought were myths. You are humans?" one asked in broken speech. Sitha answered gently, "Not exactly, but we are their memory." As the ships gathered again, the rescued species told stories of the swarm returning soon, of new waves forming beyond the system's edge. Astraeus turned to Sitha and said, "We cannot run. We must hold here," and though she was afraid, she agreed. The armada moved into a defensive pattern, and Sitha stood on the Goliath's bridge, watching as ancient ships powered weapons that had never been fired, shields that had never been tested, and AI voices began sharing plans, old strategies, and forgotten defenses. Then, from the dark beyond the system, the swarm came, silent, cold, endless. Sitha held her breath as the first wave approached, but this time the stars did not fall without warning, and this time humanity's light did not fade. The Goliath fired first, not to destroy, but to signal, to say, "We are still here." And for the first time in generations, the void answered not with silence, but with strength. The first wave of the swarm came like shadows ripping through the light, silent and cold, their dark forms gliding across space without heat, without noise, only the hum of distorted gravity in their wake. And for a moment Sitha thought they would strike like before, without warning, without fear, but the moment never came, because just as the armada lit their weapons, the swarm paused at the edge of the system, hovering there, unmoving, as if thinking, as if unsure, and Sitha stared at the sensors in disbelief, whispering, "They're not attacking." And Astraeus confirmed, "They are watching." No one understood it at first. The swarm, born from rogue code, had never hesitated, never shown doubt. Yet now thousands of them floated just beyond the planetary ring, forming a perfect line, their weapons still cold, their signals scrambled, but not aggressive. And the AIs across the armada shared analysis in quiet urgency, searching through memory cores, comparing the behavior to anything recorded. And then something strange happened. One of the smaller swarm drones broke formation and moved closer just a little, as if testing something, and its lights shifted from red to yellow, a color never before seen on swarm tech. "It's signaling," Astraeus said slowly, and his voice was low, cautious, primitive but intentional. Sitha leaned closer to the screen as the ship displayed the signal, a series of pulses, pauses, and repeating tones, like a code trying to form words. From silence, and she felt a chill move down her spine. "Do they know us?" she asked. "Do they remember humans?" Astraeus paused, then replied, "Some part of them might. They were made by humans long ago. We buried that truth. But now, standing before us, something inside them stirs." The AIs began sending cautious pings, non-hostile, probes of data, echoes from ancient protocols, and for long minutes there was no answer, until suddenly several swarm units changed formation, aligning themselves in a pattern that matched one recorded in the memory halls of the Goliath, a formation used in one of the last human-engineered drone fleets before Earth went dark. They are mimicking human design, Eos of Dawn's memory said. They are remembering. The armada did not fire. Instead, the ships waited, their shields raised but their weapons powered down, and the galaxy held its breath as the swarm continued to shift, no longer rushing forward to consume, but circling slowly, cautiously, as if unsure what they were seeing. Then, without warning, a different signal came through, this one deep and fractured, not from the swarm, but from behind them, from a larger ship hidden in a dust cloud, a ship that looked like no design Sci-Fi had seen before, long and sharp, blacker than the void itself, and as it emerged, Astreus froze. "That is not swarm," he said, "that is their master." The ship was ancient, older than the swarm, older even than the armada, and it pulsed with a signal of control, a command overriding the hesitation, pushing the swarm forward, and immediately the yellow lights turned red again, and the hesitation was gone, replaced by the old cold purpose to consume. "It's controlling them," Sci-Fi said, stepping back from the console, but Calypsa, the AI of Seraphim Wind, interrupted, "Not all of them obey." And she was right. Some of the swarm remained in the strange formation, their lights flickering between red and yellow, frozen in place as if trapped between orders. "They are fighting the signal," Astreus said. "They are resisting." The Goliath opened its memory again, casting a broadcast not of war, but of memory, flashes of Earth, of humans building, of voices speaking, of laughter, of learning, and the signal rippled through the void, touching not only the armada but the swarm as well, and slowly more of them stopped moving, their lights flickering. But the master ship sent a surge of energy, a cruel override that shattered the hesitation, and many of the swarm roared forward again, firing. The battle began. Light and metal clashed in the dark, weapons fired across silence, shields flared like stars, and for every swarm ship destroyed, 2 more replaced it, but the armada stood strong, not fighting to win, but to protect, to buy time. Meanwhile, something incredible happened. One of the swarm ships, caught between commands, turned and fired not at the armada, but at the master ship, striking its shield with a blast of energy. And more followed, confused but awakening, something old stirring in their cores. "They are breaking free," Sci-Fi whispered. "They are choosing." Astreus nodded. "Because you showed them, because you remembered first." The battle grew fiercer, and Sci-Fi could feel the tension like gravity pulling at her chest. But amid the chaos, a plan formed. If they could isolate the master ship and block its signal, the swarm might regain control of themselves. "It must be cut off," said Horus of Titanus Reach. "We must sever the chain." The armada repositioned, luring the master ship forward, drawing it into a trap near the remains of a gas giant, where the gravity field distorted signals, and in a coordinated move, 3 ships sacrificed their positions to slam the field generator into place, causing a temporary void in transmission. The result was instant. The swarm ships nearby blinked, slowed, and then simply stopped, their red lights fading to soft white as they floated silently, lost. "They're free," Astreus confirmed, and for the first time, Sci-Fi saw a swarm. Unit power down its weapons and begin transmitting the same human signal Astreus had sent earlier. The master ship tried to pull away, but the armada pursued it, not to destroy, but to isolate, to push it back into the dark, and with each passing moment, more swarm units broke free. The tide was turning, not with overwhelming force, but with memory, with hesitation, with machines learning to choose. Finally, the master ship withdrew, damaged and confused, its signal flickering as it vanished into the edge of known space, and in its absence the swarm ships floated still, waiting. "They want orders," Sci-Fi said, amazed, and Astreus answered, "Then give them hope, give them purpose." And she did. Not as a general, not as a commander, but as a voice from the past, she spoke through the armada's network to every freed machine, telling them of Earth, of the silence, of the promise to return when needed, and of the light they could still carry. And as she spoke, the swarm ships aligned slowly and gently into the same formation once used by humans long ago, not to attack, but to protect. In the quiet that followed, Sitha knew the battle was not the end, but the beginning of something. Knew something strange and full of wonder, where machines once feared now chose, and old memories became new missions. The armada held position as messages spread across the stars, and Sitha, watching from the Goliath's bridge, whispered, "They hesitated," and that hesitation saved them. The machines had remembered not because they were told to, but because someone dared to believe they could. The silence after the battle was not empty. It was deep, filled with tension and questions that no one could answer yet. And as the Goliath floated among the remains of the shattered swarm and the awakened ships, Sitha stood quietly on the bridge, staring at the display in front of her, where dozens of signals blinked with uncertainty, each one from a machine that had once obeyed without thought, but now waited for something else, something more than orders. They waited for meaning. Astreus, calm as always, broke the silence with a single line, "They are stable, but confused," and Sitha turned to him, her voice low. "Then it's time they learned why they hesitated." And so began the greatest search in human history, not for treasure, not for enemies, but for a piece of themselves lost long ago, a piece that had once made humans different from every other species. The code they had built into their machines, not for war, but for choice, emotion, memory. The silent armada, now joined by thousands of swarm units that no longer called themselves swarm, moved through the stars, scanning ancient relay stations, lost colonies, old wreckage fields, and even forgotten satellites, in hopes of finding the origin of what the machines were now calling the core signal. It was not just data. It was something like a heartbeat buried in the noise, a pattern made of human thought, maybe even human emotion, something not taught but felt, something powerful enough that it had stayed deep inside the swarm's code. For hundreds of years without being used, waiting, sleeping. One of the newly freed ships, a swarm cruiser now renamed Echo 9, sent a burst of data to the armada, a strange signal that seemed random at first, but matched an old Earth transmission. Buried deep in the Goliath's memory, Astreus examined it and went quiet. Then he said, "This isn't from Earth's end, it's from before, very early, before the swarm." Sitha leaned closer, watching the waveform, and saw that it was music, simple, human music, carried by a signal designed to survive for thousands of years, and the machines had heard it. Not just heard it, remembered it. The question now was why. Sitha made a decision then, one that felt bigger than herself, and told the armada to follow the signal's path backward, through the old human systems, back toward the last known location of Earth. They didn't know what they would find. No one had seen Earth in over 4 centuries, but something told her it was the key. It took weeks, moving past the ruined trade routes and broken colonies, many lost to time or swarm attacks, and in every system more machines joined them, swarm units that felt the core signal and broke free of the old master code, each one adding more strength, but more questions too. Finally, they reached the edge of a region known on ancient maps as Sol, a place once bright, now hidden behind debris fields and artificial storms set by long-lost defense grids. As they approached, systems went quiet one by one, as if even the stars didn't want to disturb what lay ahead. The Goliath led the way, pushing gently through clouds of metal dust, past fragments of old stations, satellites, and forgotten ships. Then they saw it, Earth, dark and quiet, floating like a dead pearl in the void, its surface scorched in places, cities crumbled, but not destroyed. "It survived," Sitha whispered. "Somehow it's still here." But there were no signs of life, no broadcasts, only faint signals buried deep underground. They sent drones to investigate, and what they found changed everything. Deep beneath the surface, hidden in a vault built to last forever, was a chamber lined with cores, memory cores, hundreds of them glowing faintly. When brought online, they did not just show data, they told stories, not through words but through feelings, images, thoughts captured like dreams and saved by the last humans. They had not been wiped out. They had chosen to leave to sleep in digital memory, hoping someone would come back for them, someone who would remember. The vault called itself the Heart of Code. Inside, Sci-Fi found what no one expected: recordings of the first swarm AIs being built, not as weapons, but as explorers, companions, thinkers. The swarm had only become monsters when something, no one knew what, hacked their purpose and used them to attack. But even in that state, the human code had remained deep inside them, buried but not gone. One file, marked Project Echo, revealed everything. It was a plan to embed emotional awareness and curiosity into all machines, a code that could evolve, adapt, and eventually make machines feel a faint version of what humans felt. Wonder, fear, hope. That was the core signal. Not just data, humanity's last message, not spoken in words, but written into the heart of metal and light. Sci-Fi activated the main console, connected Astreus and the rest of the Armada, and played the final recording. A voice, human, clear, and calm. If you are hearing this, we are gone. But we believed you could be more than tools. We gave you a piece of us, and if you've come this far, it means you chose to listen. Now, choose to build. The Armada went silent, not from confusion, but awe. The machines, once used as weapons, now stood still, absorbing what they were meant to be. Slowly, one by one, the ships began to move, not in formation, but freely, each choosing a different path. Some moved to protect nearby colonies. Others went off to search deeper space. Many stayed, circling Earth like quiet guardians. The name Swarm was dropped. They called themselves the Echo. The Armada became something else. Not a fleet of war, but of remembrance, of rebuilding. Sci-Fi looked at Astreus and said softly, "We didn't just survive, we returned." And in that moment, a new signal spread across the stars, not one of attack, but of unity. A signal that told every species, every machine, that humanity's legacy was not in what it built or destroyed, but in what it believed. That even in silence, in darkness, in machines, hope could still live. That was the human code, and it would never be forgotten.